Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the shows. Well, it's been the Easter this year, 2023 gone, and it's been very good season-wise. We've had the SIG games happening at Gold Coast and very successful from all the reports that have come through. We'll try and get a little bit more in-depth report probably later in the week from one of the organizers or someone who was involved with that. But all the reports that have come to us thus far means that it was very well organized, very well attended, and in the true spirit of sports. Having said that, there were many other functions and events that did take place over the Easter long weekend. And of course, for our Christian brothers and sisters, a very, very sacred time. Savita Singh presented some wonderful programs for the four days of Easter on Australian Indian Radio, and I'd like to thank her for that. And congratulations to our Des Sharma. He has just launched his book, and the book is here in my hand right now. The Immortal Hindu Tales, and that was inspired because he's been writing regularly for Brisbane Indian Times, a regular writer. So every month he sends an article. All those articles is compiled into a book form, which is quite good and wonderful to see. And in his acknowledgement in the very beginning, he has acknowledged Brisbane Indian Times as one of the inspiration for him to do the book. So that is wonderful when we get this kind of feedback from the community, and when we look at someone who's actually gone through having written so many articles, then putting it together in a book form. Isn't that so wonderful? Well done, and congratulations, our Des Sharma. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now we're still having a bit of the issue from our Delhi team, so we still don't have the daily India report. There are some compliance issues, some issues, but anyway, we are working through those, and we'll see how things progress. But right now, let's go locally and get a news in brief.
WA's north are being warned to prepare for what could be the strongest storm to hit the region in a decade. A tropical low is developing off the coast and is expected to reach cyclone strength later today. Authorities warn it could continue to intensify, becoming a Category 4 system later in the week, crossing the coast between Broome and Port Hedland. Waste management workers are staging 24-hour strikes across Sydney and Canberra today. Workers employed by Cleanaway are angry about changes to pay and hours and are campaigning against longer shifts and a reduction in overtime rates. They'll be leaving bins uncollected in the local government areas of Sydney, Randwick, Erskine Park and Silverwater. In the US, the Governor of Kentucky has revealed his close friends are among the victims of a mass shooting at a bank in Louisville. At least 4 people have been killed in the nation's latest shooting, carried out by a former bank employee. The shooter is also dead. Several people have been injured, including 2 police officers. Members of ABBA are paying tribute to their longtime guitarist Lasse Wellander, who's died after being diagnosed with cancer. He joined the band in 1974 for a recording session and then became ABBA's main guitarist, touring with them between 1975 and 1980. He also played on the soundtrack for the 2 Mamma Mia movies and released a number of solo albums.
And what a great guitarist he was as well, ABBA. We must be giving our age, but yes, one of our favorite times, and what a wonderful group they were. And our heart goes out to the guitarist. He will be missed. Well, right now, let's go as we head from the main in the news in brief. Now, let's take a look at that same news in a little bit more detail about northern Western Australia, where they're preparing for that storm.
Western Australia is bracing for what could be the strongest cyclone to hit the northwest in a decade as a tropical low continues to form off the coast. Locals and tourists are being urged to have emergency plans in place and stay across all the latest information. The low pressure system is intensifying and is forecast to become a Category 4 system within days. Nate has latest details. Nate, good morning. So where are we at with this?
We're keeping a very close eye on the situation. The low was meant to become a cyclone, essentially every update over the last 24 hours, but it has been stalled courtesy of some wind shear, which is where the winds at different levels in the atmosphere are at different speeds and different directions. Now that wind shear is forecast to ease today, so we are likely to see this system intensifying further. Now it's likely to reach Category 3 strength before turning in towards the coast, where it's going to come in strong with wind gusts potentially well in excess of 250 kilometres an hour. It's also bringing some big falls. At the moment we've got warnings on between Cape Leveque and Broome in WA for gales in the next 24 hours. But once it starts to move in, we're going to see that really developing along the rest of the northwest coast. It'll carry a lot of that strength inland as well as it packs a punch. We're talking about the potential for 400 millimetres for some daily as this comes in. Now the other thing we're watching is what's happening with the oceans, because those winds are really going to whip up what's likely to be a storm surge, especially on the eastern side of the system. This is quite a broad system and it's going to be a large area impacted. We've also got flood watches on for several rivers getting into the sandy desert as well, with all of this rainfall expected. So if you're in the area or expecting to be anywhere nearby, definitely get onto the Bureau website, download the app so you can get local notifications. Team, it is very likely later on today we will be talking about Tropical Cyclone Ilsa.
Definitely, Nate. Yes, and if you are in the area or affected areas, keep and watch out for all the notices that have been put out, because, don't get caught out. So act and act accordingly, act early. Don't leave it to the last minute as well. Right now, let's go to Tasmania and let's take a look at this news report on the Dali collection.
From twists on the familiar to history reimagined, it's a peek inside the mind of one of the 20th century's most famous artists.
Dali had a way of looking at the world, and sometimes I think we all need to stop and look at the world a bit differently.
This is just a fraction of Australia's largest collection of Salvador Dali works on paper. The prints, etchings, drawings and copies date back as far as the 1930s.
A lot of people know that there's the museums in Spain, Paris and Florida. However, that's different types of artworks, so a lot of sculpture, original paintings.
The 1,500-piece collection is a 30-year passion project for a local ophthalmologist.
So my day job is in restoring vision, but obviously we use our vision for so many things, and particularly appreciation of art.
It's now a museum in Launceston called Data Muse. The museum is as much about Dali's artistic process as it is about the art itself. The series behind me shows the different iterations of a Dali print, from the first idea all the way through to the final finished product.
This is about community and enjoyment of the art, but also learning about how that art's made as well.
That even includes what's known as genuine forgeries, copies done and signed by known conmen.
This is a particularly significant work because it ties back to a story of forgeries, and he actually did it while he was in jail.
The bottom floor is open for entry with donation, while the top floor is for ticketed tours. Erin Cooper-Douglas, ABC News.
And what amazing collection there. My apologies for the sound there. I think when they did the recording, they had one channel off, the other channel was very, very noisy. Looking at that art, it's just amazing. Well, right now we also look at some of our endangered species, especially the turtles. What's happening? And like in this report, it's a homecoming for them.
Lots of little steps for these tiny hatchlings in the hope of a giant leap for their species. 93 endangered loggerhead turtles released to the joy of hundreds of supporters on Shelley Beach on the New South Wales Central Coast.
The community can't believe it, we can't believe it that we have had an event so far south here.
Loggerheads usually lay in southeast Queensland. This nest of 130 eggs was the southernmost on record for the species, laid in sand too cold for them to survive. 130 eggs were transported to Taronga Zoo before being returned to the beach after they'd hatched.
We weren't expecting anything like the number that have hatched to hatch. The success rate is phenomenal.
It was locals who called authorities after the mother was spotted on the beach in January.
We walk this beach every single day and now this amazing thing's happening and we just see her nest and then we're able to see her All the babies get released.
The sex of sea turtles is determined on the temperature of the sand they're laid in. That means these little turtles here on Shelley Beach are all male. For these little fellas, there should be plenty of mates in the sea.
It is thought that there is a feminisation happening of the species, meaning that there's a lot more girls than what there are boys.
Not all will make it to adulthood, but even if a handful survive, it'll boost hope for the species.
They're really tiny little things, and we can't mark them, we can't put anything in them or on them that we can detect later in their life, so we'll never know.
In coming days, another 20 hatchlings will join their siblings in the sea. Kira Proust, ABC News, Shelley Beach.
Shelley Beach, and what a wonderful report there. See, look, these are the kind of things that we can do to contribute and help and conserve our nature and some of our endangered species, and wonderful and great effort. Congratulations and hats off to everyone who was behind that and getting that ready. Well, right now let's go to India. Well, of course they say India is an amazing country. Well, amazing, but they're contributing to the world population as well. So that's another contribution from India. So is India ready to become the world's most populous nation?
Well, of course, we all know that the growing economic and political power of India, but of course the challenge that India will face, they're already existing challenges relating to infrastructure, to physical infrastructure, to social infrastructure, so being able to provide universal health care and then the other services which an aging population needs, issues regarding inequality, around economic inequality, which is obviously very big in India, and high levels of poverty, but also the severe gender inequality that we see. And then finally, of course, the issues of fragmentation. How can you keep everybody in the country happy? How can you make sure that there is tolerance and cooperation between different states and between different groups, particularly religious groups? So these are all issues that we see in India at the moment, we've seen in the recent past. And yes, of course, having a grown young population is good for the economy, but unless these other issues, the kind of software of population, are not addressed, then obviously with more people that can become more challenging.
Yeah. And what about whether development is keeping pace with these changes? If you think of how high the youth population is in India, even employment opportunities would be an issue.
Well, of course, this is one of the big challenges in India and in many middle and lower income countries, is what we call the informal economy, in that the jobs which younger people and, well, in fact, all people are going into are not necessarily the jobs where, you're paying tax, where you are properly insured, where you're properly looked after, where you are paying money in, which can develop these kind of the social infrastructure that we were talking about before. These jobs, on the other hand, you see these are what we call informal jobs, where you may have a small shop, you're working for yourself, you're working you're working in an informal way. It's not what we would call kind of decent employment. And of course, India is really, I think, struggling with trying to formalize the economy, and that's very, very difficult because it's difficult to encourage people to pay tax, right? To move into that formal sector, and to, because that involves your trust in the government, increasing improving the governance of the country as well. So although they're moving in this direction, of course, this change from an informal to a formal employment system is something which is really a big challenge.
China for many years, Stuart, tried to control its population growth by limiting couples. They were only allowed to have one child. They are now facing different challenges as its population starts to decline.
Well, so of course, as we have population decline, we have population aging, which I think is really a bigger challenge in China. Because if you've got a smaller number of people who are working, let's say, and you've got a greater number of people who are dependent on that working population, whether or not that's through pensions and health services, social services, and so on, then obviously that becomes a kind of a challenge, right? If you've got fewer fewer people paying in and more people who are kind of taking out, then that's a big issue. But then that's a big issue in many, many countries all over the world. It's a big issue in Australia, for example. And so, of course, what you have to do is you have to look at this from both sides. You have to improve productivity, you have to improve employment rates among the working population, and of course you have to find a way to reduce the dependency of the older population. And of course that can be done through unpopular reforms like increasing the retirement age, increasing the pension age, which in China at the moment is pretty low by international standards, but also of course by improving active aging, by making sure that people are healthier for longer, are able to stay at home for as long as possible, and reducing poverty. All of these things China has been really active in the last few years.
You pointed out Australia and many other countries in Asia and Europe are facing declining populations, but does a population size really matter, or is it more about policy settings?
That's exactly right. There's no such thing as an optimum population size, optimum population structure, optimum population growth. People think that it's, oh, well, if everyone has 2.1 children, then all the problems will go away. And of course, that's simply not the case. That's simply not true. It's about having decent policies which are responding to these changing demographic circumstances and demographic characteristics. And half the reason why Australia, why in Europe, in North America, we are struggling with these issues is because they've been left for such a long period of time. And whereas in East Asia, and increasingly in new places like in Southeast Asia, which are aging very rapidly, they're having to adapt to this in a much more rapid kind of condensed period of time. And so that's, I think, an advantage which places like China, but then also in Thailand or Singapore or Vietnam have over Australia or over Europe, in that their systems are much younger. It's much easier to adapt and change these systems because people have just not got used to them in the same way that we have in Europe or in Australia or in America.
Yeah, but for a lot of those nations, Stuart, social stability sort of can be impacted by population growth. Could this threaten some governments if they aren't keeping pace?
I think that changing population size is a little bit, and changing population age structure and so on, is a little bit like the rain, okay? If it's raining outside, there's very little that you can do about it, right? If you go outside completely unprepared and you don't carry an umbrella, you're going to get wet, you're going to get uncomfortable. But if you see that it is raining, you can see that actually, how do we adapt to that kind of situation, right? And that if we just kind of go on the way we carry on and we don't make any changes, we're going to get wet, we're going to get uncomfortable. And it's the same with aging, and it's the same with population decline, where rather we just see that this is an inevitable next stage of our human development in every country in the world. And how we lived in the past up until this particular point, if we carry on doing that into the future, this is not going to work out. So we need to adapt to these changing demographic, economic and social paradigms. It would be exactly the same thing with climate change, right? We have to adapt and respond to this completely different situation that we're in order to give ourselves a more sustainable future.
And the key there is the ability to adapt. And I agree with that. Don't meddle with nature. Things are happening, they will happen. So, just by limiting the number of people or children that a family can have is not going to help, as was said in the report, but having proper systems in place, good policies in place to support that and embrace that this is what it is, this is what it is, this is what the numbers are. Let's see how best are we able to adapt. And as he mentioned, the same goes with climate change. Climate will change. The world has evolved from the time over the time. We used to have dinosaurs, no more. Deforestation. So many things have contributed. There are many things we can control. Yes, we can look after the hygiene and other part. There's many things which is in our control, which we can do. But of course, there are many things which are, far beyond our control. Things such as natural disasters. Nature has its own way. So when things like that happen, it changes the course of life on Earth, and we need to be able to adapt. The inability to adapt will always lead in confusion. So having good policies in place, but not enforcing the things against nature. Well, I think that report was very good, but if you look at India and the population and what India's been able to do running so far, I know when Westerners look at India, their way and their methodology, the way of thinking is quite different. But India has survived on its own, within its own method. There is a slightly different mindset, the way of working. They will get things done. Things will get done. While looking from outside, you would just get so frustrated. You would get so overwhelmed. What and how is this going to happen? But they do. They make it happen. If you look at from 1940s, they've had this very, very booming and very successful movie industry, Bollywood. If you look at that, how successful it has been. And even in those days and times, India didn't manufacture those cameras. It didn't manufacture the projection screens. It imported them. They adapted to the technology, learned the skills. Of course, the script writing, the acting, and all that's natural. The talent's there. But all the technology they brought in from overseas, and the music direction, the script writing, songwriting, everything was so just amazing. So yes, leave it to its own, put some nice policies in place, adapt to the change, and move on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now let's take a look at some of the functions and events happening right here in Brisbane. There you are, ladies and gentlemen, up to date on Australian Indian Radio. Hey, it's been wonderful having your company today, and welcome back after the Easter long weekend. and I hope that you all had a wonderful, wonderful time over the 4 days doing whatever it is. It means different things to different people, and that is okay, that is fine. We respect that. And it's been wonderful, to see that Queensland weather was very good. Of course, there have been some incidences on the roads, which always happens, but I don't have the final figures or things. Maybe by tomorrow, we'll take a look at how we did over the Easter weekend. But I think this year it was more sober, more tamed, and more in control, in line. Well, until tomorrow, it's goodbye from us.